no work whatsoever. And now we're going to try to start working. But it's going to go very slowly, tediously slowly. We're going to think about simple, elementary ideas from Rosicrucian philosophy. As I mentioned last time, the slant of these talks is introducing Rosicrucian philosophy with an eye toward healing. There's a lot of suffering going on, and not a lot of things that are really being done to help that suffering, other than materia medica, which is probably not the best way to go. So the first thing we're going to try to do is understand what a human is. And we're going to do that from the viewpoint of mysticism, which means we're going to look at the inner and outer constitution of a human. We're going to try to see how it functions and how it malfunctions and why. Eventually we'll look at other things. We have a whole list of things. There are, up here on the table, are schedules for what we're going to do in all of these talks. I do things by little series of talks, little sub-series. And this sub-series, ooh, look at that. Oh, terrible, terrible. Got microphone troubles here. This little sub-series is called What is an Aura? That's the fun title. It's going to take us a while to understand that. The other subtitle, which is more formal, is called Spiritual Cosmography. In macrocosm and microcosm. It's a fancy title so that if you get nothing else out of the talk, you can go home and impress your friends by saying, I went to a talk on spiritual cosmography, and they'll be duly impressed, and they will look at you with all kinds of respect after that. Cosmography is just a big word that says mapping the cosmos. Macrocosm, we know, is the big universe. Microcosm is the little universe. So simply said, we're just going to describe the spiritual worlds from the little vantage point of our personalities and the larger world. In the last talk, when we introduced the subject of Christian mysticism, we said that we didn't do what we wanted to do as a cold intellectual activity. We want to have something that's more live and something that is more intimate to our everyday living. So everything we do, we want to be experiential. Now, unfortunately, I'm not a person who is able to teach you whippo-zippo to be a clairvoyant and experience all of these things immediately. That takes a long time and a lot of trouble in order to develop those abilities. You can and must spend hour after hour developing inner faculties. That's in your spare time, of course. In your full time, you do things to serve, because you can't possibly fit into the universe if you're not helping out what's going on in the universe. And so that's what it is all about. So When we look at our fellow human beings with our eyes, we see what is to us the most obvious part of a human being, the dense physical body. We see it every day. We live in it every day. But when we live with something every day, there's a tendency to take it for granted. And when you become familiar with something, that familiarity often switches off curiosity. Because when you're familiar with something, you think you know something. And familiarity and knowledge are two very different things. You can be familiar with a landscape and not know anything about its geology. You can be familiar with a friend and maybe not understand how their psychology works. So we tend to take things for granted. In our bodies, we get cozy with them, and when we live with them long enough, we begin to accept them for what they are. And sometimes we're just a little too accepting. In fact, I have more around my waist that I have to accept all the time. It happens all so easily. So we walk around in something of a slumber about our most intimate and our most evolved vehicle of consciousness, our dense physical bodies. Now, if we want to heal and we want to help others learn more through their bodies and not experience pain or suffering or disease or malfunction, we have to correct that kind of slumber. We have to do something about the negligence that leads to that unconsciousness. In the Rosicrucian philosophy, we have a temple service that is very beautiful. And in that temple service, there is a line that is a very important line, and it says, if we don't love those whom we have seen, how can we love God whom we have not seen? And that's the way we have to treat the physical body. It's a wonder. The physical body is a marvel. It has amazing complexity and at the same time a very elegant simplicity. Bones, using the same amount of steel and making steel rods of the same weight as any of the bones in our body, they aren't as strong as the light and apparently frail bones that we have in our skeleton. It's something wonderful. It's something we can see. It's something that we can love and appreciate. Myself, every morning when I'm eating breakfast, when I'm at home, when I'm traveling like this, it doesn't work that way. But when I'm eating breakfast every morning, I study physiology. I get the physiology books that nurses and doctors read when they're learning physiology for school. And you can't turn a page without there being a handful of wonders about how the physical body works. Every session that I have is, like I'm awed by it. Physiology gives us an understanding, for example, of our perception, which is how we relate to the external world. Do you know that under good conditions, you can see a match struck at 11 miles away? Like if you're on the side of a mountain in Arizona and somebody 11 miles away is in your plane of visibility and they strike a match, you can see that. And you can smell one part in billions. It doesn't take much at all. And the human ear, if you hear someone speaking, you know exactly where they're coming from because all of the nuances of tone that go into speech worked up, and it's almost beyond our belief how good our body works when it's working. So through the senses, we have a capability of appreciating not only our own bodies, but appreciating the beauty of the world around us. Ken here does quite a bit to change the beauty of this place. He's doing all of the landscaping, which is sort of a living kind of sculpture. But beyond all of the sensory perception, we have mobility. We have all of these things we can do with our bodies. Our bodies are miracles. What takes place unseen in our bodies is also astounding. Like, for example, in every cell of our body, there is the Krebs cycle of metabolism. And it's measured in terms of thousandths or 10,000ths of a second. And each cell puts the food or the waste through about 6 chemical reactions in a 10,000th of a second. It's just amazing. And it does this on and on and on. And we walk around, we take it for granted. And we feed our bodies junk food, and we do all sorts of things like that. It's quite a wonderful thing. The body is composed, depending on how you look at it physiologically, of about 10 or 12 very complex systems. Digestive system, circulatory system, breathing, nervous, which has several subsystems within it. And it's all composed of tissues, and the tissues are composed of cells, and it begins to be a very simple process of building cell on cell. And in these systems are a multitude of activities. In physiological processes, it's all founded on balances. There's a sugar-insulin balance. There's a potassium-sodium balance. Do you realize that of the energy that we spend in our body, even if we're a runner or an athlete or something like that, the vast majority of the energy that we spend in our body is spent maintaining the sodium-potassium balance. Inside the cells, it's all potassium, and in the interstitial fluids, it's primarily sodium. And there's an interaction between them, and maintaining that balance spends almost all of our energy. There's an oxygen-carbon dioxide balance. There are many different balances. Even our consciousness, when we as spirits are functioning in our bodies, is suspended within balances. If the temperature gets a little too high or the temperature gets a little too low, we get distorted consciousness, and eventually we fall unconscious. So there's a very delicate balance. Can't be too hot, can't be too cold. Similarly, if we get too much or too little oxygen, our consciousness in our dense physical bodies is changed and in some cases completely distorted. Now, all of these activities in our body are done with amazing efficiency. They're done with an efficiency that can't be matched or even approached by science and technology. It's a really delicate kind of thing. If we think about it, one of the most wonderful things about our dense physical bodies is the fact that they can correct themselves. They can repair themselves. You can cut them, you can stress them, and they come back and they repair themselves, and they adapt quite remarkably. So even with this little glance at our dense physical bodies, we have one very useful understanding for maintaining health and for doing healing work. Balance. It is the fundamental thing of our physiological existence. If you read physiology, every few pages you run into the word for balance. And that balance is homeostasis. They're called homeostatic balances. Now we could continue on talking about the physical body. We could learn things that would be certainly beneficial to ourselves and to others in terms of healing. And that would certainly benefit all of us. But it would not be enough. Because if it were, all of us would be studying physiology and medicine, and we wouldn't be seeking deeper meaning through mysticism. We have that thing that we need something more. We have that kind of consciousness that the physical is not enough for us. So we have to look deeper. For us, we realize that when we are ill, it isn't just a matter of chemistry going wrong, and it isn't a matter of organ failure, or it isn't just a matter of microbial invasion. Those are causes, but those are some of the lesser causes. We understand that it is because of bad thinking, bad emoting, and things like that, that we have thrown ourselves out of harmony with divine laws, and so the physical is just not enough for us, and we have to go beyond that. So we'll look at the Rosicrucian philosophy as a very excellent way of understanding mystical or inner truths, and we'll try to substantiate them, and we'll try to substantiate them from our own experience. And all the while, we'll continue to try and keep health and healing in mind, because that is our work. Let's take a rather common setting, and we're going to work for several days on this. We're going to go very slow. We're going to be very careful. We can't say everything, but we'll try to hit quite a few of the main central points. Let's take a simple setting that can be seen every day. Let's take a rider on a horse next to a pine tree, next to a rocky butte. That's the setting that we're going to work with, that we can see, especially if we're in some place like Wyoming or something like that. You can see it just about every day of the year. Without getting too complicated about what constitutes a kingdom, which botanists and zoologists do, we can simply say that in that setting are representations of all four kingdoms that are active in the physical world. So let's use very simple, almost crude discriminations to first see what is different about the four kingdoms and how they manifest themselves. One of the obvious things is distinction. It's pretty obvious. It's easy to locate the borders of the physical bodies of the horse and the human. If we were very careful, we could dig up the tree and each of its rootlets, and if we were extremely careful, we could see the distinction of the tree from everything else. But when we get to the butte, we run into difficulty. Where does the butte begin and where does it end? It's inseparable from the earth. So we can say that the mineral kingdom is, in its manifestation, part of the macrocosm. That minerals, yes, there are different atomic elements, and there are different objects made out of minerals, but the minerals are inseparable from the macrocosm, from the whole big picture of things. It's a curious way of looking at it, but mysticism claims that the macrocosmic body of God is wherever there is a planet. And so all the planets of our solar system, the body of God is not, in the physical sense, contiguous. So all of the planets of the solar system represent the body of God, or organs in the body of God. We won't go beyond the solar system. That's a little far-fetched. We want to keep it real simple. Let's look at another rather obvious difference: detachment and motility. The horse and the human are detached, and they can move around. The butte is immovable, and so is the tree. So we can see that the tree is distinct, but it is rooted. We even have a word for it in our language called plant. When you plant something, it stays planted. Texture is another kind of distinction. You don't go walking into a butte without getting bruised. These are, strangely enough, I am so simple-minded that, do you know that there are 3 times in life that I have not been fully in the material world, and on 3 different occasions I've walked into street lamp poles thinking about something else or looking somewhere else, and bong. So you realize that the texture and the state of the mineral kingdom is pretty hard. The tree is not quite so hard, but in the death that it leaves behind year by year, the wood is pretty hard. The texture of the horse is much softer, much more pliable. And if you're very, very careful, you can see that the human body is even more pliable, is even more loose. Now that's not completely reliable, because the gases and the liquids are soft, and they're part of the mineral kingdom. And some animals are very soft, like jellyfish, and so are some plants. We could look at other distinctions, such as size. Very hard to size the butte if you don't know where it begins and where it ends. The tree keeps on growing forever. The horse and the human have limits. They only grow so large. But animals, or in the animal kingdom, there are microscopic animals. But all humans, for the most part, are very close to each other. I told you this is going to go very slow. It's going to be very tedious. Now, the most significant difference between the kingdoms that we see in this setting is vitality, or life. Living creatures have periods of growth, and they change within themselves. They age, or they heal. The butte, which represents the mineral kingdom, is subject only to external forces. It gets weathered, or there's chemical activity, or something like that. It rains and different chemicals are mixed together. Sometimes there's volcanism, or sometimes there's chelation. But the only way the mineral kingdom changes is from without. If we did a chemical analysis of each of these representative forms, we would find that they're composed of the same chemical elements. They would all have carbon, they'd all have oxygen and sodium and things like that. We could do that by testing all of the minerals. They do it with bodies. They burn the bodies and they collect the gases from the burning to see what percentage is there. And then they analyze the ash and they know exactly how much of everything is in a body, whether it's a human or a horse. Now, how you look at these things is different from your viewpoint. The materialist would say that it's all chemistry, and that some forms have evolved the ability to utilize organic chemistry, while other forms like the butte do not use organic chemistry. Now that's the standard materialistic argument. But it's a difficult argument, because by that argument, if everything is a product of chemistry, then even your realization that you're conscious or that there is chemistry going on is a product of chemistry. You're locked in some kind of deterministic loop. And we know that's not so. We know that we are conscious beings and that there is something of our consciousness, our spiritual being, that we can see, that we can step outside of that. We can control the chemicals. In fact, we can even, by nuclear activity, we can turn the chemicals into energy, which is a totally different state altogether. So it isn't just chemistry. Chemistry is an effect and not a cause. But if you're a materialist and you think that this is all there is, you're stuck with that kind of thinking. Now, mystics claim that if you want an answer that isn't just a pure materialistic chemical answer, you have to go beyond that. You have to go into the invisible. And the mystics claim, and it's quite a strong claim, that to do that, you have to attune yourself to what is invisible. That is, you have to see or perceive. Now, for us, and in these talks, it's all second-hand knowledge. And the only way that we can tell, or like the common statement goes, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We can say and we can draw inferences about the inner worlds, the invisible worlds, but the only way that we can know is if we do all of the work that is necessary to become subtle and to become sensitive and to care about something enough so that we can perceive and know about it directly for ourselves. We're not talking about some kind of petty psychism. We're talking about a full-blown, controlled, trained clairvoyance. That's an exceedingly hard thing to work at. Myself, I've worked at it for about 40 years. And I get closer, and I get not only more sensitivity, but I also get more insight into what I am experiencing. But I certainly can't say that I am a developed seer or anything like that. For a second now, let's step back and get a little bit bigger picture and then go back into looking at a slow, quiet, detailed view of things. Modern mystics say there is a universal spirit. Mystics of all ages, all places, all religions say the same thing. There is a universal spirit. Modern mystics say that divine spirit is creating. And what we are part of is a creation. But it's also an experiment. It's impossible that every being within the universal spirit can be growing and that the universal spirit itself is not growing. So this is as much an experiment for the universal spirit as it is for us, but on such a scale of magnitude that for us it seems like eternal and it seems like infinite, and we can't appreciate the scale of creation and the scale of experimentation for the universal spirit. So everything that's happening in all of the inner worlds are part of an evolutionary creation within the universal spirit. The ultimate intents or the ultimate purposes of it all are something that with our very limited consciousness, it's absurd for us to think that we can understand. We understand that there is something more than our consciousness, and occasionally we get glimpses and we're awed at how much wisdom and how much love is behind everything that we see. But if we think that we're going to be able to give an ultimate answer to what life is all about, that's just not possible. You don't teach a 6-year-old kid calculus, but you know that if the kid learns how to count and do arithmetic and develops itself slowly, the kid will learn calculus. Similarly with us, if we continue to grow up, that's what evolution is, it's growing up. If we continue to grow up and we continue to open our consciousness and give our consciousness to the Spirit as part of it, because we're all foci of that one universal Spirit, we will see those universal truths. We will understand why it is all going on. We, as spiritual beings, are transcendent. We are part of the universal spirit. It is exactly as Christ Jesus says when he is reprimanding the Pharisees. He says, "Do you not know it is written that ye are gods?" Mystics claim that within the macrocosm there are many, many worlds or states of existence. And there is a gradient between pure spirit and coarse matter. Today, for the most part, we have been speaking only about coarse matter. And I think we're about ready to go back to the small view and get a little look. We can observe things about the image that we're using, the butte, the tree, the horse, and the person riding the horse, and we can get insights into higher states of existence. For example, a trained clairvoyant would say that immediately within and behind the dense bodies of all 4 of these kingdoms is a realm of vital life and energy. Different from the way physics sees it, or physics doesn't see it. Physics realizes there is an energy, but not that it's something that can be seen. Their claim is that our perception is limited to what is called the visual spectrum. The same mystic that can see the realm of life, vital life and energy, would say that the universal spirit, working through all 4 kingdoms, has to some extent learned to work with this energy, with this vitality. and the degree with which each of these kingdoms can work with the energy or vitality is different according to evolutionary experience. If we learn to work with this process of learning to work, of taking vitality and building with it, the sooner our lives will be more vital. Now, a few minutes ago we intimated that the minerals are dead. That wasn't quite exactly right, because there's nothing that is dead anywhere in the universal spirit. But the deep degree of ignorance, the deep degree of unbecoming that is in the mineral kingdom is such that the kind of life that it has is not of the same kind or the same degree as the life that we have in our bodies. It's pretty obvious that we are energetic. We move about. The poor Butte can't move at all. Everything, including the minerals, is interpenetrated by this energetic life. Even the solids, the liquids, and the gases. The Rosicrucian mystics, who have taken centuries of careful clairvoyant observation and have corroborated each other's findings, claim that beyond the solids, the liquids, and the gases are 4 more physical states, and they are called etheric states. So the visible part of the physical world is called chemical, the solids, liquids, and gases. The invisible part of the physical world is comprised of ethers. Now we have to be careful about the use of words, because some of these words have been around a long time and they've been used by different people in different ways. For example, Sir Isaac Newton, the British physicist, talked about an ether, but he formalized a term called a luminiferous ether. However, the way he formalized it is not the way that it is seen by mysticism. And as a consequence, there have been scientific experiments to try to prove or disprove the existence of Newton's luminiferous ether. The most famous being the Michelson-Morley experiment, in which they proved that there can be no such thing as a luminiferous ether. And they quit looking after the Michelson-Morley experiment, and because of that, they never did find the ethers. Now, the densest of these ethers, that is 1 step more rare than the gases, is called in Rosicrucian philosophy the chemical ether. And the closest term that we have for the chemical ether in the normal English language, as it is used by physicists as well as by lay people, is the word energy. The region of chemical ether is a region of energy. And we're going along pretty fast. This might not even take 90 minutes today. When we experience the ethers, we have to experience them through our physical bodies, because we have not yet learned to transfer our waking consciousness from the dense physical stuff, from the chemical stuff, to the etheric stuff, so we don't have etheric perception. As a consequence, we don't usually feel the ethers. We don't feel the life because we're muffled by the coarse stuff of the dense physical world. It's a pretty gross state that we're in. If we could experience the ethers from the realm of the ethers, they are exceedingly live. They are exceedingly vital. When we deal with energy as it is dealt with in physics, we're dealing with energy in a state of dying. There's a fancy word for it in physics. It's called entropy. In the second law of thermodynamics, it says that all energy goes from a higher state to a lower state, and eventually the energy is lost or dissipated. So what we're dealing with is the decay of something that in its state of its own is very live and vital. We're not talking only about nuclear decay. We're talking about all entropic decay. The way energy is looked at by science, it is called electromagnetism, or it is called the electromagnetic spectrum of energy. Material science admits that it's dealing with something that is dead or dying. So even though we can learn things from the physical world through science, it's still not exactly the same thing as seeing things directly. That's one of the things that's difficult about us since the fall of humanity. One of the result, how does Paul say it in the Bible? He says it in a very shocking way. He says the end of sin is death. And we have a very deathly consciousness. If we want to understand what's going on in the body, it's not like mystics. Mystics develop the clairvoyance, and they can see it as it's going on in the body. But if a scientist or a physiologist wants to see what's going on, he has to cut it apart. He has to kill it. He has to destroy it. And once it's in that deathly state, you can't see the reality as it really is. Now, granted, it's all that most people have. And for some reason, like there are thousands of people in laboratories killing things. Not only living plants and animals, but they're breaking down all kinds of forms. And here we have about eight of us trying to look at things in such a way that we can see them when they're live. It's a sad thing for our world that we live on as much death and on as much destruction as we do. Now, there are practical sidelights to this. For example, there's a fad right now in alternative healing where people tape magnets onto themselves. And some people use electromagnets and put them on themselves, and they feel healed. Now, I won't say that that doesn't work, because to some extent it works. A lot of things work. But are they totally beneficial? I don't think so. In this case, since we're dealing with something that is a form of energy that is in decay, it is more disruptive to the vital body in the long run than it is healing or energizing in the short run. It's sort of like the inimical effects that occur with radiation therapy. It's a form of radiation therapy. All right, let's get back to the chemical ether. The chemical ether is called the chemical ether because it is what is responsible for all chemical reactions. The chemical ether affects this because, like all of the other ethers, the chemical ether is polar. It has a positive and a negative pole. Now, polarity is a characteristic of the etheric realm that is not a characteristic of the chemical realm of the physical world. For example, we don't say that a stone has an attractive or a repulsive pole to it, or if we pick up we don't say it has a positive or a negative pole because there isn't that same quality as there is in the ethers. By the way, do you know what you call a boomerang that doesn't come back? A stick. It's funny how what goes through your mind. You know, you're thinking about things and you're trying to say something very serious, and all of a sudden a joke like that pops in. We'll check him out. He just walked in. What do you call a boomerang that doesn't come back? A stick. All right, we're talking about polarization in the ethers. Now, most elements don't have poles to them. There are a few, like iron and dysprosium, that can be polarized, but for the most part, in the chemical region of the physical world, things are not polarized. The reason for the polarization is, as I see it, a distinct place in the cosmos that is held by the ethers. All of the ethers are polar. The other realms do not appear to be polar. In this world, we see only the outside of things. Since the fall of humanity, we're in some kind of a cosmic quarantine. We're exiled to live with ourselves and our destructive sin, and part of that exile is we can only see the outside of things. If we take a stone and break it up, we still see only outsides. We don't see insides. This is one of the most difficult things about unfolding clairvoyance. You have to unfold a kind of consciousness that is inward. And we are so accustomed to our materialistic illusions where we see only the external side of things, which is a very fine thing, but it's not the only way, that it takes a lot of deprogramming for us to let go of looking at the outside of things. Now, all of the other spiritual worlds, and the deeper you go into the spirit, the more things are inner. Everything is experienced inwardly. Now, the ethers form a transition between the inner worlds and the outer worlds. And because of this, I don't know how to say it, but the part of the ethers that is more outward has a polarization that is more negative. Whereas the inward side or the inward face of the ethers, which is more positive and more active, is polarized positively. So it is because of this in-between state. So when we talk about positive and negative poles of ethers, it is just as accurate and sometimes better for the understanding to talk about the inner pole and the outer pole, which is not the same as the interpole. That's international. And in fact, if you can think of inner and outer and positive and negative together, you have a much better understanding of what it's like in the ethers. So let's return to our picture. We're going to return to it many, many times. We have a human sitting on a horse, and the horse is beneath a pine tree at the foot of a butte. And we know that the internal constitution of the butte remains constant. It has only chemical interactions. All of the other forms live, and their chemistry is constantly changing. Just a few minutes ago, we talked about how frequent the changes in the cells of a human being are. Now, this difference between the butte and all of the living members is significant. It's significant in two ways. First, the butte is part of the form a form of the mineral kingdom, that it can only be changed without. That we've got. It doesn't have an internal change mechanism. The other members activate things within their own bodies. Each of them is a microcosmic little world. It's set apart. That is to say, they have expropriated from the macrocosmic mineral world. They have expropriated the same chemicals and they've made them their own. They've made them into organisms. The laws of chemistry still apply, but the laws of chemistry are controlled and utilized in ways that they are not done in the mineral kingdom. So we can see that there's something significant going on here, that there is an inner life that has taken the world to itself. That's a really important state. When, it's nice to study something and it's nice to belong to something, but when you can do it yourself and you've made it part of your own being, that's a wonderful thing. A mystic would say that the universal spirit is working through the living kingdoms in such a way that they have learned to not only take the mineral stuff and make it part of their own, but they have learned to work with vitality. Now, there's a whole lot more that we could say about this, and I'm struggling at this point because I have to cut, because we can't say everything in elementary talks. Another thing is that the chemistry is now used directly. And if you think about it, and I think very few people have ever thought about it, more chemistry goes on the higher the level of consciousness in the universal spirit utilizes the stuff of the chemicals. What I'm trying to say is that if we look in macrocosmic nature, yes, there are things like petrification where water takes the carbon out and puts silicon in and you have petrified wood and things like that. There are chemical processes that are going on in the mineral kingdom. But there's not a whole lot of chemical activity. The most is at the floor of the ocean where the heat is coming through crevices and there's all kinds of chemical actions going there. But when you get into plants and you see how dirt is turned into a flower or how dirt is turned into a lovely essence, that is pretty complicated chemistry. And when you get into humans, into animals, and you see all the hormones and enzymes and everything that are produced chemically, there's much more chemistry going on. And then when we get to humans, something very special takes place. It not only takes place inside of our bodies, but it takes place outside of our bodies. There are wondrous things that are being done. There are thousands and thousands of polymers that are being made in chemical labs. We as humans are doing enormous things for the chemical world just by our scientific interests. In our little prayer group in Madison, we have a wonderful man. He's a genius. He's a New Yorker, and he talks with a New York accent. And when he was in high school, he was already taking courses in ring theory at Columbia University. He's a bona fide genius, PhD. He's read, he's a distinguished professor. To become a distinguished professor, there are maybe, like the campus that I'm on, the faculty is several thousand, and there are maybe 5 or 6 distinguished professors. And he's a distinguished professor. He's a probationer with the Rosicrucian Fellowship. He's read all kinds of deep spiritual philosophy. And he says nothing is as clear and as direct and says it as well as Max Heindel. And so, and he's a wonderful guy. He does things in chemical laboratories. He has a patent on a substance that is so phenomenal that it made the science page of the New York Times when he discovered it, or when he made it. It's a substance that when you stretch it out, instead of getting thinner, it gets thicker. And he also has another patent that is now being looked at by the aerospace industry. You know, normally when you push a substance, it resists your push. Well, this man has developed a metal that when you push against it, rather than resist your push, it helps it. And it's, you know, so these are little side trips. But to me, my friends are the most important things in the world to me. And anytime I can speak well of my friends, I take a chance. There will be a lot of side trips talking about friends. But at any rate, most of the chemistry in the world is done by humans, not only within their bodies, but outside in laboratories. Mystics understand that it is wrong thinking, as we mentioned earlier, to include intelligence as part of chemistry. When we think, or when we have an idea or an insight that we can communicate to someone else, it's not because of what we ate for breakfast. It's because of what we are in spirit. Now we're beginning to see something that is almost like the converse, and that is that chemical forms are a result of life, and not that life is a result of chemical forms. The big difference between the tree, the horse, and the human from the butte is that the tree, the horse, and the human have forms that live, and they grow, and they change. They're capable of modification. Now, the mystics claim that the ability to grow and the ability to live is due to a realm in the ethers that is still more subtle than the chemical ether. And that realm is called life ether. That is the plant, the animal, and the human have learned by a very long, slow, experiential process to be able to take the stuff of life ether and appropriate it to their own use, and with that produce living forms that through working with the chemical ethers they can make those forms grow and become and modify and live. We know that the chemical region is basically inert. A lot of stable, hard chemicals there. Now, every chemist and every biologist knows that there are differences between organic and inorganic chemistry. For example, almost all reactions in inorganic chemistry happen much faster. However, the interactions that take place in organic chemistry are much more subtle. They're much more complex. And they're much, much more versatile. Chemists, biochemists, have gotten so far that they can take chemicals right off the shelf. In fact, I've asked a genetic chemist this very question. Can you create a virus? And they say yes. They can take chemicals that are not living off the shelf, and they can put them together, and they can produce a form, and that form will hold life for a brief moment of time. It's the form that's holding the life, but it isn't a form that is precipitated by life. And as a consequence, their viruses that are made from stock chemicals, we're not talking about genetic manipulation, but made from stock chemicals, are only forms. They can't go on and live and reproduce. They have to get that from a living source, which they can modify if they like. So these biochemists think they're on the edge of life when they're really only in the realm of form. They even laugh if we start talking about ethers. They start laughing about it. They call it vitalism. And they say in all of their studies, even with electron microscopes, they've never seen an ether. These are the same people that look up into the heavens with a telescope and say, I never saw God there anywhere. It's just that it's coarse. I don't want to belittle them, but what they're doing is looking in a very coarse fashion. If we reverently support life, if we promote life, and if we are sensitive to life, we begin to attune ourselves to it. A great animal trainer, or somebody that can sculpt things out of plants, are people that have done that. Now, mystics claim that in the same way that there are particles or little bundles of energy that radiate from the sun, mystics claim that there is a stream of life ether that comes from the sun. And that all of us, to some extent, as foci of the universal spirit, by attuning ourselves to life, can absorb that life, and eventually we begin to live. It's like everything exists in the macrocosm, and the microcosm develops it later. The analogy that is always used in terms of evolution, whether it's spiritual evolution or material evolution, is because there is light, we evolved an eye. The light was there in the first place. The possibility of life was there before we developed the ability to take life and produce living forms. It takes a long time. If you think in terms of cosmic evolution, it takes a long time. You have to be, in the same way that we make things out of stuff. We make automobiles, we make computers, we make all kinds of things. And we're working on the minerals. And after the minerals take so many forms, the focus of the universal spirit, the group spirit of the minerals, begins to understand sustaining form. And from those many forms, it sinks into the universal spirit that one form can take modification. It can change shape. It can grow. It can reproduce itself. Now, in terms of evolution, spiritual evolution we're speaking of, it takes millions of years and many, many experiences for that to sink in. This is an important thing for us to recognize, because what we're trying to do as spiritual students, or we're trying to grow up and wake up spiritual faculties, it takes a long, long, long time. And we just can't give up. We have to work patiently, we have to work carefully and caringly for a long time, and we will get to that. Another distinct, separate, autonomous microcosmic etheric body is developed out of the macrocosm. That's what happens. In Rosicrucian terms, the ability to have a separate etheric vehicle that is made of the chemical ether and the physical and the life ether, which means it can take a chemical form and it can live and grow, that is called a vital body. Because the vital body facilitates vital life. Now, some things live only a few seconds. The Sherman sequoia just up the road here has lived over 2,000 years. It's a wonderful tree to go see. If some of you are visiting California, it's worth renting a car to go out and see the big trees. It's an awing experience. The Sherman sequoia is so big that the first branch is over 200 feet up. And it's so big that the diameter of the first branch is 6 feet. Can you imagine a slab of wood with a 6-foot knothole? I mean, that's what you're talking about. And it's something that has been around that long. It's just nice that you can't get really near it because they have shallow roots and they only let you about 40 feet away. There was an even bigger one. It's the famous one that they had hollowed out and cars used to drive through it. And because people got too close to it too much, it destroyed that very delicate root system that's so shallow. And it died. I guess it went the way of all things in the world. So some things live as long as thousands of years. But there is more independent autonomy, and it requires a deeper understanding to sustain life. We have to have the will to live for a longer time. This is why organic chemical interactions take longer than inorganic chemical interactions, because there's much more that you're doing. Me, I'm a bachelor. I can hop in the car within an hour's time and take off across the country. But if you've got a bunch of kids that you've got to take care of, you know, they got to be fed, they got to be dressed, and they're all running this way and that. It takes a long time. This is why inorganic chemical interactions take longer. It's something like if you're playing chess. You know, if you walk around the block, it doesn't take any thought to do that. But to make one little move in a chessboard takes quite a long time of contemplation. And that's sort of along the same idea. Now, mystics claim that the life ether is also polarized. But the polarization works differently. First, it is slow. And it's possible for one pole of the life ether to be suppressed for a very long time, and one pole accentuated. Now, this is not our normal idea of polarization. We think that if something happens to the positive pole, something has to happen to the negative pole. But the life ether is such that the will of the focus of the universal spirit, no matter what kingdom it is, can either suppress or activate one pole or other of the life ether. Now, since it is the purpose of the life ether to cause the physical body to live and grow, that can only be done by reproduction. And the positive pole of the life ether is responsible for reproduction, all the way from the cellular level to the organic or the organism level. In the life ether, not all of our energy is spent in mere metabolism. The metabolism is more important than we give it credit. We often hear of people who go into states of suspended animation, or someone goes in, what is it called when someone is in an accident and they're just laying there for years? What? Coma, that's the word I'm trying to think of. From a spiritual point of view, someone in a coma is not living a wasted life. The spirit is spending its time doing all of the things that it does in the physical body and learns in the physical body through all of the biochemical actions, even though the consciousness isn't there. It might even be, it might even be the destiny that such an individual has not resided in their body and paid attention to the actions of the body, and for a while they need to suspend conscious activity and give full attention to doing all the things that are done in the physical body. Now we have to be very careful about not getting materialistic notions about the ethers, or we'll get the idea that the etheric body is built in the same way that a crystal is built. If you ever have done things like growing crystals, I did it for a while, that's an exciting thing. You start with a little crystal, and in an evaporate solution, it grows as the water evaporates. The crystals grow around your seed crystal, and it builds up and up and up. That's not the way the physical and etheric bodies grow. The etheric matrix is there, and even the stuff of the etheric matrix is there before the physical form is there, and before the etheric form is there. It is to say, our bodies are suspended in the etheric matrix more than they are in the than they are a matter of physically growing one cell on another. The cell division process and the building of the body takes place within the ethers. Suspense is a very excellent word for understanding the ethers, because if we became conscious of the ethers, we would realize that we are suspended in them, and that our bodies really are floating in them. And it's not such a thing that we're like the trees planted. People who leave the body report that the experience of being in the etheric soul body is like falling. It's being in a lesser gravitational state. And the experiences as described by astronauts in space, where there is a lowered gravitational state, is almost identical to what people report from being out of the body. It feels like they're falling, and you have to get rid of the idea of falling and get used to the idea of you're suspended in space. It takes a lot. The psychological part of getting used to the inner worlds is a very big part of doing the whole business. Max Heindel says that a person may be very good as a non-volitional leaving the body invisible helper. You may help a good deal, but then suddenly you learn to leave the body, and it takes a long time before you're useful again. It takes at least 6 months before you know how to do things right, because it's a really disorienting experience. Sometimes even having just a small opening of clairvoyance where you see there is so much going on at the same time, it's phenomenal. A friend once described to me a waking moment in the desire world. And this friend had studied a lot of both Max Heindel and Rudolf Steiner. And the friend said, the first thought that came to mind was, this isn't anything like Max and Rudy said it was like. And then, as the experience settled into them, the person said, the next thought that came to mind was, how could they be so objective about an experience like this that is so chaotic? And the admiration of that person for the people who have the objective understandings like Max Heindel had went up enormously. Just hearing the story from the person was quite remarkable. Now, this is known by some scientists. There is a scientist from Cambridge in England, a very brilliant man. His name is Rupert Sheldrake. And he says that there are fields of energy that are there before a plant or animal or human develops physically. And he even has experiments where he claims that the energy field surrounding the developing seed decreases as the plant takes shape. Because he studied mysticism, they don't listen to him. Even though he's considered even by all of his peers, he's considered a brilliant but idiosyncratic scientist. In fact, there is a $1 million prize that will be awarded to anybody who can do a definitive experiment that proves or disproves the existence of a morphogenic field, which we would call a developing vital body. So it's known. Science is on the edge of, we're on the last page. Hey, we might even get this in another 2 hours. The more we leave the exclusively outward view that we have of things and penetrate into the spiritual worlds that are behind it, the more the distinction between life and form is suspended. So that when you get deep into the spiritual worlds, life and form are the same thing. There really isn't much form. This is a world that is all form. And the form that there is in the spiritual worlds is the kind of form that is much more abstract than it is concrete. By the time we get to the life ether, which is not very deep into the spiritual worlds, we find that it is exceedingly fluid. It is exceedingly supple. There is like a flux of life ether and of energy, you might say. And it is suspended. In terms of health and of vitality, the fluid nature of the life ether is exceedingly important. It is our source of vitality. This flux of life ether, if we are healthy, is bristling with vitality. In its pure state, it is like an elixir. It's like a panacea. Because if it's of the stuff out of which the matrix of our physical bodies is made, it can vitalize that matrix, or it can change that matrix where it has gone awry. And that's healing. Miraculous things can happen with it. The life ether comes from the sun, but almost every living being can take it in directly from the sun into their vital bodies. However, in order to do other things in evolution, animals and humans have sacrificed the ability to take in all of the life ether and comprise their vital bodies from it. It's that way. We can't do everything at the same time, so we set some things aside and do other things. So we sacrifice the ability to live on sunlight in order to do things with the creative forces that work inside of us, and it works out just nicely, because then the plant kingdom gets to do service to the animal kingdom and the human kingdom by doing what we can't do. The plants take the life from the sunshine, from the flow that comes from the sun, and they build vital bodies that are just rich in ether, and then by our consuming of the live plants, we get the ether that we wouldn't be getting otherwise. Arctic explorers who can't get green foods have to expose themselves to the sunlight, and they have to do that even in the cold. I've read several articles about Arctic explorers and Antarctic explorers, and it's a well-known thing among the Inuits, for example, that you have to expose yourself to get the sunlight in order to remain vital. By consuming fresh, raw plant stuff in abundance, we can ensure that we're going to have a lot of vital energy. By the stress that we experience in the world, we expend this energy, and we have to replenish it. Now, in terms of what we've been saying, this means that there are two kinds of digestion. There is chemical digestion, and there is etheric digestion. Both are necessary, but they are opposites to each other. The chemical digestion is easily satisfied. We do it all the time. And it's best satisfied by eating simple foods that have been cooked enough so that the chemical constituents are easily digested. But even in the chemical food that we eat, it has to come from the plant kingdom. We can't just go out and grab a handful of minerals and take them in. We need the plant kingdom just as they need us. The other kind of digestion is etheric digestion. And we get that when things are not cooked. Because if you cook things, it drives off the ethers. Therefore, if we eat plenty of vegetables, more than fruits, vegetables that have been juiced, for example, there is an abundance of ether. You can't live only on ether, and you can't live only on caloric food. You have to have a combination of both, because we have a physical body and we have an etheric body, and both have needs that have to be satisfied. And it's a great mistake to become only a raw fooder or to become only a chemical fooder. Raw milk, which is now almost impossible to get, if you can get raw milk straight out of the cow, that has an abundance of etheric energy. Raw milk taken with honey, which has a matrix that holds it, gives one the ability. Magnetic healers like Max Heindel recommended it quite a bit. Drinking raw milk and having honey, you can hold the life ether. The life ether is something that's quite fluid. And it's fluid and it is polarized. And that means that it can be given or taken from us. Meaning to say, there are people who can vampirize. Some do it consciously, but most do it unconsciously. I remember when I lived here many, many years ago in the mid-'60s, there were two of us young fellows that would never let this one little old lady pat us on the back. We were ungenerous because if she patted you on the back or if she gave you a hug, that was as good as losing as much energy as working a half a day. She didn't know any better, and she was in some ways a very pathetic individual. And she thought so negatively of herself that she was something like an energy sponge or an energy sop in her psychology. Just drew that off of you. On the other hand, if you keep yourself bristling, if you keep yourself charged with etheric energy, you can give it to other people. You can take away headaches. You can do things like that. But you have to be careful because it is an act of direct magic. And you're responsible for all acts of direct magic. And if you take away somebody's headache without that person realizing why they have the headache, you may be not helping them, but actually harming them, because they may have to go through yet another headache until they learn the lesson that is behind it. So the life ether is very peculiar. What? The mother. Yes. Let's talk about the mother. The peculiarity of the life ether is such that it is polarized also. But each of us, because of our gender differentiation, has suspended or depressed one of the two poles. For example, females have suppressed the negative pole of the life ether. And they have strengthened the positive pole. This is why they have more vitality. They don't have the bursts of energy, but they can sustain much longer than men. They can live longer than men, and they can produce babies. Even if you were able to put a womb inside of a male, the male still would not be able to do the job of making a baby because it doesn't have that positive charge that does the building, that forms the matrix for the incoming entity. So the male is at the negative, charged at the negative pole of the life ether. So the vital body of each of them throughout life is different from the opposite sex. I think this is about enough for now. We're looking at what is an aura, and we've taken a few of the first steps. Tomorrow we'll get further into the etheric worlds and get into some of the material that deals more with what we're interested in terms of our consciousness. We want to have soul growth, and soul growth has a lot to do with the two higher ethers, and we'll go further with that tomorrow. Let's close with the Rosicrucian prayer. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Thank you very much. No. I should be. Yeah, it will. There will eventually. It'll after I leave. A few weeks after I leave, tapes will magically appear.
I had to attend to medical emergency, and I was driving, and I said, "I'm going to tell you, why is it we are gods and immortals, and I have to drive so many emergency
That sounds
away from my lecture?"
I think by that you may have got more soul growth than if you had attended the lecture.
Well, but I got both.
Because intellectually, you can't become spiritual intellectually. You can only do it by sacrificing and doing...
But I think we need both.
Yes.
Because I'll tell you, your lecture was so significant to me, because one day I got some idea about the life, in terms of life unit of the sun, and then after this intellectual thought, thinking about it, suddenly I experienced, my God, every human being, when it's born, it has a unit of a sun coming to the earth in that birth, but then I also realized this unit of life leaves at the end.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
the whole thing became experience.
Yes.
But it's only because I was